It was a calm Thursday evening when everything changed. Dinner was done, the dishes loaded in the dishwasher, and the scent of garlic bread still hung in the air. My wife, Bethany, was curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone with a small smile on her lips. Standing in the kitchen doorway, I watched her, feeling a deep sense of contentment. She was my world, my partner, my best friend, the person I had built my life around. We had been married for 7 years. Things weren't always perfect, but I had always believed in us, in what we had. I took pride in being the kind of husband who paid attention to the little things. Surprise date nights, handwritten notes tucked into her purse. I put my love into every small gesture. If she was tired, I made sure she could rest. If she was stressed, I listened. If she wanted something, I did my best to make it happen. That night, as she chuckled softly at something on her screen, I felt a flicker of curiosity. Bethany had always kept her phone close, but I had never thought much of it. Everyone deserves a bit of privacy, after all. But something about the way she laughed made me pause. It was light, playful, different. Not the way she laughed with me anymore. I pushed the thought away and walked into the living room. "What's so funny?" I asked, sitting down next to her. She quickly locked her phone and set it face down on the coffee table. Her smile faded. "Oh, just a meme Rebecca sent me," she said, her voice casual. But there was something off, a nervousness I hadn't heard before. I tried to brush it aside. Bethany had always been a private person, and I had never been the jealous type. But as the night went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She seemed distracted, distant, as if her mind was somewhere else. Later, she said she was heading to bed early because of a morning meeting. I stayed behind, barely paying attention to the silent images on the TV screen. A heavy feeling sat in my chest, one I couldn't explain. Then I noticed it, her phone, still lying on the coffee table. For the first time in our marriage, I felt the urge to cross a line I never thought I would. My hands were shaking as I reached for it, my heart pounding so loudly it felt deafening. I wasn't great with technology, but I knew Bethany's passcode by heart. Birthdays, anniversaries, I remembered them all. The screen unlocked, and a flood of notifications appeared. Most were harmless, emails, shopping alerts, a weather update. And then I saw it. "Harry." The message preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My mouth went dry, and a cold sweat broke out across my skin. For a moment, I clung to the hope that there was an explanation. Maybe Harry was a coworker, a friend. Maybe this wasn't what it looked like. But deep down, I already knew. As I opened the conversation, my worst fears became reality. Their messages were full of familiarity, inside jokes, shared moments, a connection that had nothing to do with me. He called her babe, a name she hadn't used for me in years. Then there were the photos. Nothing inappropriate, but enough to make my stomach turn. Bethany, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in so long. Her eyes shining with a spark that had faded between us. I kept scrolling, each message another wound. They talked about their secret meetings, the thrill of sneaking around, how right they felt together. My grip on the phone tightened, fingers digging into the case as if I could crush it. The life I had built with Bethany was falling apart right in front of me. I wanted to wake her up, to demand answers, to make her tell me why. But instead, I put the phone back, exactly as I had found it, and stumbled out of the room. My thoughts spun out of control. How long had this been happening? Why did she do it? Was it my fault? That night, sleep never came. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying our years together, the laughter, the fights, the quiet nights side by side. Had any of it been real? Or had she stopped loving me long ago? By morning, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed time to think, to figure out what came next. But I couldn't ignore what I had seen. The woman I loved, the woman I had given my heart to, had betrayed me. And there was no coming back from that. When Bethany got ready for work, she kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. "Have a good day," she said, smiling as warm as ever. But everything had changed. And deep down, I knew nothing would ever be the same. A week later, I found myself in a sleek Italian restaurant downtown, seated at a polished oak table with a few colleagues. It was meant to be a typical business meeting, networking, discussing project details, maybe enjoying a decent meal. But I wasn't really there. My mind was stuck in a loop, those text messages repeating over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. I barely touched my food, nodding absently at talk of quarterly projections. Then I glanced across the room, and my whole body went cold. Bethany. She was sitting in a dimly lit corner booth. And she wasn't alone. Even without an introduction, I knew exactly who he was. Harry. He looked just like the photos I had seen. Tall, lean, with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The way they sat, too close, leaning in, lost in their own world, told me everything I needed to know. Then I heard it. Her laugh. The same light, playful laugh I had heard that night on the couch. But now, it wasn't a mystery. It was for him. Something inside me twisted painfully. For a brief moment, I considered storming over, demanding an explanation in front of everyone. But I didn't. Maybe I was too shocked, or maybe a small part of me still wanted to believe there was some innocent reason for all of this. So I stayed put, watching. I needed to see the truth with my own eyes, no matter how much it hurt. They seemed at ease, completely unaware of the world around them. Harry leaned in, whispering something that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen in years. She touched his arm, fingers grazing his skin with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. Then they stood up. Harry placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward the hallway leading to the restrooms. My pulse pounded in my ears as I watched them disappear around the corner. Every part of me screamed to stay put, to walk away. But I couldn't. I had to know. Muttering something about needing air, I excused myself from the table and followed. My footsteps felt heavy, my breath shallow as I made my way down the hallway. I could hear voices ahead, though the words were too faint to make out. Then came the soft echo of laughter, followed by the quiet creak of a door opening. As I reached the corner, I saw them slip into the women's restroom together. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. The hallway fell silent except for the distant hum of conversation from the restaurant. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Then it happened. The muffled sounds of moaning from inside. A chill ran through me, my fists clenching at my sides. How could she do this? Here, in public, without a second thought? The woman I had trusted, the woman I had built my life around, was in that room with another man. I took a step closer, the world spinning around me. Each sound from the restroom was like a hammer blow to my chest. I wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to make them face what they had done. But I stopped myself. If I acted now, in the heat of the moment, I might lose control. As much as I wanted to unleash my rage, I had to be smart. I turned away, my body shaking with anger and heartbreak, and walked back to the dining area. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat back down at my table, but everything around me blurred. The chatter of my colleagues, the clinking of silverware, it all faded into the background. My hands trembled as I tried to steady my breath. The sounds I just heard kept replaying in my head, each one cutting deeper than the last. How could she do this? How could she throw everything away so easily? No one at the table seemed to notice my distress. I forced myself to nod along with the conversation, even managing a weak smile now and then. But I wasn't listening. My gaze kept drifting back toward the hallway, waiting for them to reappear. Minutes stretched like hours before they finally emerged. Bethany walked out first, calm, composed, radiant even. Like nothing had happened. Harry followed, wearing that smug grin that made my blood boil. They returned to their booth, resuming their meal as if they hadn't just shattered my world. I couldn't look away. She was smiling, the same warm, genuine smile I once believed was only for me. Seeing it directed at him felt like a knife to the gut. They leaned in close, speaking in hushed tones, sharing small touches that were far too intimate to ignore. My phone buzzed on the table, jolting me from my thoughts. A text from Bethany. Don't forget to grab milk on your way home. So casual. So ordinary. As if she hadn't just betrayed me moments ago. The audacity of it stunned me. She was living two lives, and she was so confident I'd never find out that she had the nerve to text me during her rendezvous. My grip tightened around my phone, anger bubbling beneath the surface. But I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay in control. This wasn't the time or place. If I wanted to confront her, I needed undeniable proof. You okay? One of my colleagues asked, snapping me out of my trance. Yeah, I said, forcing a tight smile. Just a long day. I stole one last glance at the booth. They were still there, lost in their own world, completely oblivious to my presence. My fists clenched under the table. I needed to get out of there, away from the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing down on me. The meeting wrapped up soon after, and I barely said goodbye as I left. My mind was already racing, planning my next move. If she thought she could continue this double life without consequences, she was wrong. That night, I didn't confront her. I waited. When she came home, she greeted me like nothing had changed. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day was. I played along, keeping my voice light and casual, hiding the storm raging inside me. But as she talked about her busy day at work, I knew things would never be the same. I had seen too much, heard too much. The woman standing before me wasn't the same person I had loved for years. And as painful as it was to admit, our life together was falling apart. That night, as Bethany slept beside me, I started making plans. If she thought she could betray me and walk away unscathed, she had no idea who she was dealing with. This wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning, the air felt heavier between us, though Bethany seemed completely unaware. She hummed softly as she poured her coffee, looking relaxed, carefree. I watched her from across the kitchen, my mug untouched, my mind replaying the events of the night before. I had to stay calm. Lashing out wouldn't get me what I needed. Not yet. She was too good at playing innocent, too skilled at twisting the truth. If I confronted her now, without solid proof, she'd make me look like the crazy one. So I played along. Big plans today? I asked casually, leaning against the counter, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. She glanced up and smiled. Just the usual. Meetings in the morning, then maybe lunch with Rebecca. I nodded. Sounds nice. What about you? Busy day at the office, I said smoothly. She sipped her coffee, nodding. Oh, don't forget, my company dinner is next week. You're still coming, right? I hesitated for a split second, thrown by how effortlessly she kept up the facade. Of course, I said after a moment. Wouldn't miss it. The thought of sitting beside her at that dinner, pretending everything was fine, made my stomach turn. But I had no choice. Not yet. When she left for work, I stood by the window, watching her car pull out of the driveway. Once she was gone, I grabbed my phone and got to work. I scoured everything, our shared accounts, her credit card statements, call logs, anything that might tell me where she had been, who she had been with. And what I found only deepened my suspicions, the receipts from restaurants on nights she claimed to be working late. An unfamiliar name popping up in her rideshare history. None of it was outright proof, but it was enough to fuel my suspicions. Over the next few days, I became more watchful. When she left for one of her so-called lunches with Rebecca, I started following her. I hated what it made me feel, like some detective spying on his own wife. But I had no choice. If I wanted the truth, I had to see it with my own eyes. Saturday came, and Bethany casually announced she was meeting Rebecca for brunch. I didn't argue, didn't question her. I just nodded and let her go. The moment she pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed. The drive felt endless. Every red light, every turn she made, pulled me deeper into a reality I didn't want to face. Then she took a turn that led nowhere near Rebecca's neighborhood. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. Minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a boutique hotel. I parked a block away, my hands trembling as I watched her step out of the car. She wasn't alone for long. Harry appeared a few minutes later. His face lit up the second he saw her, the kind of smile I hadn't seen from her in years. They embraced briefly, laughing, before heading inside together. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. This was it. No more guessing. No more doubts. I stayed in my car for what felt like hours, torn between barging in and walking away for good. In the end, I chose neither. Instead, I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures. I documented everything. The way they laughed as they walked into the hotel. The way she clung to his arm. Every image felt like another crack in the life I thought we had. An hour later, they walked out, completely at ease. They strolled to a nearby cafe, sitting close, talking, touching, like a couple without a care in the world. It was sickening to watch. But I needed this. If she ever tried to deny it, I'd have proof. My hands clenched into fists as I sat in my car, staring at them. Every part of me wanted to storm inside, to demand answers, to make her face what she had done. But I held back. Not yet. If I was going to confront her, it had to be on my terms. Later, they returned to their separate cars and drove off. I stayed behind, staring at the empty parking lot, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Bethany thought she was in control. She had no idea the walls were closing in. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and for once, I left work early. The past few days had been unbearable, the tension suffocating. I had spent every free moment running through what I would say when the time came to confront her. But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to walk into. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, the faint hum of the air conditioner the only sound. I set my bag down by the door, kicked off my shoes. Everything looked normal. The living room was tidy, the kitchen spotless. For a moment, I wondered if she was even home. Then I heard it. A soft moan from upstairs. I froze. For a second, I told myself I had imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, followed by muffled laughter. A slow, searing rage spread through me, my fists clenching at my sides. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay steady as I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last. My heart pounded in my ears as I approached our bedroom. The door was cracked open just enough for me to see inside. And there they were, Bethany and Harry, tangled together in our bed. The same man whose smug face had haunted my thoughts for weeks. They were too caught up in each other to notice me standing there, too lost in their betrayal to sense the storm about to hit. What the hell is this? I roared, shoving the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. Everything froze. Bethany's face drained of color as she scrambled for the sheets, her eyes wide with shock. Harry fumbled for his clothes, his usual cocky grin wiped clean. "You've got 5 seconds to get out of my house," I growled, my voice shaking with rage. "Now." Harry hesitated, glancing at Bethany, as if expecting her to defend him. But she didn't say a word. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. I stepped closer, fists clenched. Harry finally got the message. He grabbed his clothes and bolted, nearly tripping in his rush to escape. "Don't ever come back here," I spat as he disappeared down the stairs. Then silence. Bethany sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the sheets to her chest. Her breath was shaky, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. But I felt nothing for her anymore. The weight of what had just happened settled between us like a suffocating fog. "How long?" I finally asked, my voice cold and steady. "How long has this been going on?" "Mason, she stammered, her voice cracking. "It's not what it looks like." I let out a bitter laugh. "Not what it looks like." My voice rose. "I just caught you in bed with another man, Bethany. What part of that am I supposed to misunderstand?" She flinched. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "Don't." I cut her off, my jaw tightening. "Don't insult me with that excuse. You chose this. How many times, Bethany? How many lies?" She stared at the floor, her lips trembling. But there was nothing she could say to undo what I had seen. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice breaking despite my anger. "I loved you. I trusted you. And this is what I get in return." "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. I let out a hollow laugh. "Sorry," I echoed, shaking my head. "That's all you've got? You weren't sorry when you were sneaking around behind my back. You weren't sorry when you were lying to my face every single day." Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I had built my life with, was gone. In her place sat a stranger, a selfish, deceitful stranger. That's who she was now. Someone who had torn my world apart without a second thought. "I can't even look at you right now," I muttered, turning away. "Get dressed. We're not done talking." Storming out of the room, I felt the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Our life as we knew it was over. Downstairs, I paced back and forth, my hands still trembling. The image of them together in our bed was burned into my mind, replaying every time I closed my eyes. A few minutes later, Bethany appeared at the top of the stairs. Dressed now, but disheveled. Broken. Her eyes were red, her face streaked with tears. She hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to step closer or keep her distance. "I can explain," she said softly, her voice cracking. I turned to face her, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Explain?" I scoffed. "Go ahead, Bethany. I'd love to hear how you're going to justify this." She flinched, but didn't back down. "I didn't mean for this to happen, Mason. I swear. It just got out of hand." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Got out of hand? That's your excuse?" "This wasn't some accident, Bethany. You chose this. You lied to me. You betrayed me. Don't act like you're some victim in all of this." Tears welled up in her eyes as she wiped at them with shaky hands. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop." "You didn't know how to stop?" I repeated, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. "You had plenty of chances to stop. Every time you lied about where you were. Every time you texted him. Every time you let him into our house. You chose him." Her lips trembled as she collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said coldly. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just cheat, Bethany. You destroyed everything we built together. Our marriage. Our trust. It's all gone. Do you even care? I do care, she sobbed, looking up at me, desperation in her eyes. I care so much, Mason. That's why this is killing me. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt so lost. So disconnected. And Harry, he made me feel. Don't. I cut in sharply. Don't you dare blame this on me. Don't stand here and act like this is my fault because you felt disconnected. You could have talked to me, Bethany. You could have told me how you were feeling. But instead, you went behind my back. You made him your solution. She broke down into sobs, curling into herself. But I felt nothing. No urge to comfort her. No sympathy. The pain was too raw. I need to know the truth, I finally said, my voice cold. How long has this been going on? She hesitated, her gaze flickering away. A few months, she admitted quietly. I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. A few months. My voice was hoarse. Months? So all this time, you've been sneaking around, lying to my face, pretending everything was fine. It wasn't like that, she said quickly, shaking her head. At first, it was just talking. I didn't think it would go anywhere. But then, it did. And I didn't know how to stop. I exhaled sharply. Talking? I repeated. Talking turns into this? Do you hear how ridiculous that sounds? She didn't answer. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her guilt. I took a deep breath, my chest aching. Why, Bethany? My voice was quieter now, strained. Why him? What did he give you that I couldn't? She hesitated again, searching for the right words. Then, finally, she said it. He made me feel wanted. A hollow, crushing silence settled between us. I swallowed hard. And I didn't? My voice cracked despite myself. I gave you everything, Bethany. Everything. And it still wasn't enough. Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't care. My heart had already shattered beyond repair. I can't do this right now, I muttered, turning away. I need time to think. You need to leave. Her breath hitched. Leave, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Mason, please. Just go, I said firmly. I can't even look at you right now. She choked on a sob as she grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. I'm sorry, she said one last time before stepping outside. The door clicked shut behind her, and I finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I sank onto the couch, the weight of everything crashing down on me. My chest felt tight. My mind raced with questions that had no answers. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my entire heart, was gone. And in her place was someone I barely recognized. The hours dragged on after Bethany left, but I couldn't sit still. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of her. The throw blanket she loved, the coffee mug she always used, the faint trace of her perfume still lingering in the air. I needed someone to talk to. Someone who wouldn't sugarcoat things or offer empty comfort. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. I couldn't call my family, not yet. But I did know someone who could handle it. Josh. He'd been my best friend in college, the guy who always had my back. Life had taken us in different directions, but if there was ever a time to reach out, it was now. The phone rang twice before he picked up. Mason? Man, it's been forever. What's up? His voice was warm and familiar, a small relief in the chaos. Josh, I said, my voice shaky. I need you. Can you come over? Instantly, his tone changed, serious now. What's wrong? Are you okay? No, I admitted. I'm not okay. Just, please, come over. I'll explain when you get here. I'm on my way, he said without hesitation. Give me 20 minutes. I exhaled deeply, grateful he hadn't asked for details over the phone. I wasn't ready to relive it just yet. True to his word, Josh arrived in under 20 minutes, a six-pack of beer in hand. He stepped inside, took one look at me, and set the beer down without a word. Mason, he said, his voice low. Talk to me. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my face with my hands. It's Bethany, I finally said. She's been cheating on me. Josh's jaw clenched. What? I caught her today, I said bitterly. Upstairs. In our bed. With him. Jesus Christ, he muttered, shaking his head. Mason, I'm so sorry. That's... God, I can't even imagine how you're feeling right now. I let out a hollow laugh. Angry. Heartbroken. I swallowed hard. Numb. Josh handed me a beer, cracking one open for himself before taking a long sip. Start from the beginning, he said. Tell me everything. And so I did. I told him about the texts I found on Bethany's phone, about seeing her with Harry at the restaurant, and finally, about catching them in our bed. The words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered, each detail sharpening the pain I was trying so hard to suppress. Josh listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally, his expression growing darker with every word. When I finally finished, he leaned back, his face a mix of anger and disbelief. "She brought him into your house?" he asked, shaking his head. "Into your bed? That's unforgivable, Mason. She didn't just cross the line, she demolished it." "I know," I muttered, barely above a whisper. "But knowing that doesn't make it any easier. I keep asking myself what I did wrong, what I could have done differently." Josh's jaw tightened. "Don't do that. This isn't on you, Mason. She made her choices. No matter what was going on in your marriage, there were 100 other ways she could have handled it. But she chose this. She chose to betray you." I exhaled shakily. I don't know where to go from here," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Do I try to forgive her? Do I file for divorce? It feels like my whole life just fell apart." Josh leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's something only you can decide," he said. "But you need to give yourself time. Don't make any big decisions while you're still in the thick of it. Take a step back. Focus on what you need right now, not what she wants, not what anyone else thinks." I nodded slowly. His words made more sense than anything I'd been able to think up on my own. "I told her to leave," I said. "I packed her stuff. She's probably at a hotel or something." "Good," Josh said firmly. "You need space. Let her deal with the fallout of her own choices for once." Silence settled between us, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. After a moment, Josh spoke again. "You want me to stay?" he asked. "I can crash here if you don't want to be alone." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I think I need to be alone tonight. But thank you for everything." Josh stood, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You're going to get through this, Mason," he said. "It won't be easy, but you're one of the strongest people I know. And no matter what happens next, I'm here for you." For the first time in days, I managed a small smile. "Thanks, man. I mean it." As Josh left, I felt an odd mix of emotions. The pain was still there, sharp and relentless. But beneath it, there was also a flicker of something else. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way through this. The first night without Bethany in the house was a strange mix of peace and pain. The silence was both a relief and a burden. I thought I'd feel better without her here after everything she'd done. But instead, the emptiness pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Sleep was impossible. I spent most of the night tossing and turning on the couch, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and confusion. By the time sunlight crept through the blinds, I was exhausted, my body aching from the stiff position I had curled into. But the ache in my chest was far worse. The day stretched ahead of me, long and uncertain. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. I decided to start with something simple, clearing the space. If I couldn't fix everything, at least I could take control of something. I grabbed an empty box and started moving through the house. Everywhere I looked, there were traces of her, reminders of the life we'd built together. A life now stained by her betrayal. The first thing to go was the framed photo of us on the mantel. It was from our honeymoon. I barely remembered the joke we had been laughing at in that moment. But we had been happy. At least, I thought we were. I stared at it for a moment before turning it face down in the box. It hurt, but it had to be done. Next came the little things she had scattered around the house. A ceramic cat she found at a flea market. The collection of souvenir mugs she had to get from every trip. The throw pillows she insisted brought the whole room together. One by one, I packed them away. By the time I finished, the living room looked bare. Empty. And yet, it still didn't feel empty enough. I swallowed hard as I reached the bedroom. The sheets were still stripped from the night before. The mattress, bare and cold, felt like a reminder of what I had walked in on. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty bed. The image of them, her and Harry, flashed in my mind like a wound that refused to close. I turned away quickly, forcing myself to focus on the task at hand. Bethany's closet was still half full, though most of her things were already packed. But her presence lingered in the details. Her jewelry box, the scarf I bought her in New York, the perfume bottle that still smelled like her. I swept everything into the box. I didn't care if it was neat, I just needed it gone. When I was done, the house felt different. Hollow. I sat down on the couch, staring at the box filled with memories I no longer wanted to face. Just a week ago, I thought I had a partner, a best friend. Now, all I had was a broken marriage and an empty house. and the weight of it was suffocating. I realized then, I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. The weight of it all was too much to bear alone. Josh had been a good start. He helped me process the initial shock. But I couldn't keep this to myself forever. As much as I dreaded saying the words out loud, I knew I had to tell my family. I picked up my phone and dialed my brother, Niels. He was the pragmatic one in the family, always logical, always level-headed. If anyone could help me figure out my next steps, it was him. Mason, he answered after a few rings, his voice cheerful. Hey, man, it's been a while. For a moment, I hesitated. How was I supposed to drop this on him? Hey, Niels, I said, my voice faltering. Yeah, it's been a while. Listen, I need to talk to you about something. Something serious. Immediately, his tone changed. What's going on? Are you okay? I swallowed hard. No, I admitted. Not really. A heavy pause. It's Bethany, I continued, my voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I found out yesterday. Walked in on her with him. Saying it out loud felt brutal, but strangely, it also brought a small sense of relief. Like the truth had been suffocating me, and speaking it released just a fraction of the pressure. Mason, Niels said, his voice thick with disbelief. Jesus. I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine, man. I don't even know what to say. What do you need? How can I help? I don't know, I admitted, rubbing a hand over my face. I don't even know where to start. I packed her stuff and told her to leave. But now what? Do I file for divorce? Do I try to work it out? I feel like I don't even know what's real anymore. Niels was quiet for a moment before he said, Look, you don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one step at a time. But Mason, don't make any decisions for her sake. This is about you now. That stopped me. I'd spent so much time trying to make sense of what she had done, why she made the choices she did. I hadn't once considered what I wanted. I don't know, I admitted. But I know I can't keep living like this. Then start there, Niels said firmly. Take the time you need. And whatever you decide, I've got your back. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thanks, Niels. I mean it. Anytime, he said. Call me if you need anything, okay? Don't go through this alone. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. The pain was still raw, but knowing I had people in my corner made it just a little more bearable. I didn't know what the next step was, but for the first time, I believed I might actually get through this. And maybe, just maybe, I'd come out stronger on the other side. The next few days passed in a haze. I went through the motions of work and my daily routine, but my mind was stuck in an endless loop of unanswered questions. Nights were the worst. The silence in the house was deafening. I spent hours lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had happened. Bethany hadn't reached out since I told her to leave. Part of me was relieved. But another part, one I hated to admit, was frustrated. Did she even care? Was she even sorry? Her absence only fueled the questions I couldn't silence. And by the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed closure. Or, at the very least, I needed something, a conversation, an explanation, anything to help me move forward. So I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the second ring. Mason. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Bethany, I said, my tone colder than I intended. We need to talk. Can you come by tomorrow? A long pause. Okay, she said finally. What time? After work. 6. I didn't wait for her to say more. I just hung up, my heart pounding. I had no idea what I expected from this conversation, but I knew it was something I had to do. The next day dragged. Each hour at work stretched endlessly, my mind too distracted to focus. By the time I got home, the anxiety in my chest had settled into a dull, unshakable ache. I sat on the couch, waiting, replaying every possible version of the conversation in my head. But when the clock struck 6, I realized that no amount of planning would prepare me for seeing her again. At 6:05, there was a knock at the door. I took a deep breath and opened it. There she stood. She looked smaller than I remembered. Her face pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She clutched her purse tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her steady. Hi, she said softly. Come in, I said, stepping aside. She walked in hesitantly. For a moment, we just stood there, the tension between us thick and suffocating. Let's sit, I said, motioning to the living room. She nodded and sank onto the couch, folding her hands in her lap. I sat across from her, leaning forward with my elbows on my knees. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why did you do it, Bethany? I need to know. She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together. I don't know, she whispered. I wish I had an answer that would make sense, but I don't. That's not good enough, I snapped. You destroyed everything we built together, Bethany. Everything. And you're telling me you don't even know why. Tears welled up in her eyes as she shook her head. I was unhappy, Mason, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt disconnected, like we were just going through the motions. And then Harry, he gave me attention. He made me feel wanted, like I mattered. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Like you mattered? I repeated. Bethany, I gave you everything. I loved you. And that wasn't enough? Her lower lip trembled. I know I hurt you, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. And I hate myself for it. But I felt so lost, and I didn't know how to fix it. Harry was just easy. I clenched my jaw, my hands tightening into fists. So instead of talking to me, I said, my voice eerily calm, instead of trying to fix things, you ran to him? She nodded, unable to meet my eyes. The silence that followed was unbearable. I had wanted answers. I had wanted something to make sense of this. But all I felt now was emptiness. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally understood. There was nothing left to salvage. I clenched my fists, my anger surging again. And you didn't think to talk to me about it? I demanded. You didn't think to tell me how you were feeling before you threw yourself at him? Bethany's breath hitched. I didn't know how, she whispered. I didn't want to hurt you. I let out a bitter laugh. You didn't want to hurt me? My voice dripped with disbelief. Bethany, you did nothing but hurt me. You didn't handle anything. You ran straight into someone else's arms instead of trying to fix what was wrong between us. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Tears streamed down her face. I'm sorry, she choked out. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said, quieter now. You can't undo what you did. She wiped at her face. I want to fix this, she said, her voice pleading. If you'll let me. I leaned back, dragging a hand through my hair. How can I trust you again, Bethany? How do I believe anything you say after this? I don't know, she admitted, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm sorry. I want to make things right. I want to save our marriage. Her words lingered in the air. For a fleeting moment, something inside me wavered. Hope, maybe. But the weight of everything she had done crushed it before it could take root. I need time, I said finally. I can't make any decisions right now. I don't even know if there's anything left to save. She nodded, her tears falling silently. I understand. The conversation ended soon after. I walked her to the door, and as she left, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could rebuild something from the wreckage. But the other part of me knew the truth. Some wounds cut too deep to heal. The days after our conversation passed in a haze. The clarity I had hoped for never came. Instead, I was stuck in a mental tug-of-war, anger on one side, and the faint, desperate hope of salvaging something from the ashes of our marriage on the other. The weight of her betrayal hadn't lessened, but neither had the memories of the life we had before everything fell apart. One Saturday morning, a week after I asked her to leave, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window. Outside, the world looked deceptively normal. The neighbor was mowing his lawn. Kids were riding their bikes down the street. But inside, my life was anything but normal. I hadn't spoken to Bethany since that night. The silence between us was both a relief and a void I couldn't seem to fill. I reached for my phone, scrolling mindlessly through messages until I stopped at her name. Her last text still sat there, untouched. I'm sorry. 3 simple words, heavier than the situation itself. I hovered my thumb over her name but didn't press it. Instead, I called Josh. Josh arrived less than an hour later, carrying a bag of fast food and 2 beers. Figured you probably haven't eaten anything decent, he said, dropping the bag onto the coffee table. You figured right, I admitted, managing a weak smile. Thanks for coming. Of course. He sat across from me. What's going on? I hesitated, trying to find the words. I don't know, man, I finally said. I thought I'd feel better by now. I thought I'd know what to do, but I'm just stuck. I don't know if I can move forward, with or without her. Josh cracked open a beer and handed it to me. Look, I can't tell you what to do, he said. But I can tell you this. You deserve better. Whether that means giving her a second chance or walking away, that's up to you. But whatever you decide, it has to be what's best for you, not her. I took a sip, letting his words sink in. She said she wants to fix things, I admitted. that she'll do whatever it takes. But how do I know it's not just guilt talking? How do I know she won't do this again? Josh exhaled. You don't, he said bluntly. Trust doesn't come back overnight. If you want to rebuild, it's going to take years. And even then, there are no guarantees. You have to ask yourself, is she worth that effort? I leaned back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. I loved her, Josh, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I still do. Even after everything. Josh sighed. Love's important, yeah, but so is respect. So is trust. If you don't have those, it doesn't matter how much you love someone. The relationship is already broken. His words echoed in my mind long after he left. He was right. I had to figure out what I wanted, without guilt, without fear. That night, I thought about everything. The good times, the bad times, the betrayal, and the flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. But by the time the sun set, I knew. I picked up my phone and dialed her number. She answered quickly. Mason. Her voice was tentative, hopeful. Hey, I said. Can we meet? I think it's time we figure out where we go from here. Relief flooded her voice. Of course. When? Tomorrow, I said. At the park. Neutral ground. Okay, she said softly. I'll be there. The next afternoon, I arrived early, sitting on a bench near the pond. The air was crisp, the distant sounds of children playing mingling with the rustling of leaves. Bethany arrived a few minutes later, looking pale but determined. She sat beside me, leaving space between us. Thank you for meeting me, she said. I nodded, keeping my gaze on the water. I've had a lot of time to think, I began. About us. About what you did. About what I want. And, she asked, her voice trembling. I exhaled. I realized something. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. I can't spend my life wondering if it's going to happen again, I said. I can't live with the doubt, the mistrust, the constant fear that you'll choose someone else over me. She nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. I loved you, Bethany, I said, my voice breaking. I still do. Her breath hitched. But love isn't enough anymore, I continued. I can't rebuild what we had, because it's gone. You broke it. And I don't have the strength to put it back together. She sobbed quietly, her hands clenched in her lap. I'm so sorry, Mason. For everything. I know, I said softly. But some things can't be fixed. Silence stretched between us, heavy with finality. After a long moment, she stood, wiping her face. I'll always regret this, she whispered. I hope you find happiness, Mason. I really do. Goodbye, Bethany, I said, my voice steady. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The pain was still there. And it probably would be for a long time. But for the first time since everything fell apart, I could breathe again. I didn't know what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain. I was finally free to start over.